Anyway,
I wanted to talk to you about something that's sort of more related to your cats and vulnerability. But watching your video, it was very moving. But the question I think was what you missed the most.
yeah.
But you know,
What affects me the most?
my father once told me that I'm so cynical and yet so idealistic, that I have high expectations on life. But it has always been difficult for me to be vulnerable with these type of things, and especially to infuse that in art. And I struggle with it still at this moment. I don't, when it comes to my pets, they would be up there with what matters to me the most too. But it is incredibly difficult to even talk about uh, their loss and what it means to me, the way that you are able to communicate it.
Well,
How do you do it, and how are you able to find the moments where Kiwi goes and embraces Oscar, and not focus on their loss?
well, I do focus on, you have to multitask. I get back to that story that I wrote called "Elements of a Story" for this guy who contacted me 7, 8 years ago, and Jessica didn't like him because she said he was a user. But you have to be able to look at it. I mean, for example, I said Jessica and I are going to go to one of the local humane societies here. I'd gone the past couple of afternoons and seen a few kittens that we're probably going to adopt at least one, maybe two today. There's one kitten that came up and was licking me on the face. Her shelter name is Dolce. She seems to have a real affection for me. But these little things, you see them. This cop trailing me and me swerving to miss an animal. That's an anecdote. There's so much that happens at work. There's so many little moments that happen. You just have to notice them and speak directly about them. You don't have to. Jessica was showing me this guy, Robert, who's an English writer, Robert McFarlane, his supposed science
Yes.
writing, and I looked at his stuff, and it's like my God, he's so verbose, so many unneeded modifiers, so many unneeded details, and it's being promoted by the Lauren Isley Society, and these people, they don't understand that Isley was a great writer and what made him great, because McFarlane's writing is nothing like Isley's. Just because they write a bit about science and nature doesn't make him Lauren Isley. Oh, you should love Robert McFarlane. No, his writing isn't particularly good. It's not terrible. It's not as bad as the Dave Eggers and the David Foster Wallaces and the Zadie Smiths, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not particularly good writing. And this, but most people can't do that. Separate those things. You have an issue apparently in the other direction in terms of being able to speak about the things that you can notice some of these things, but you have a difficulty in speaking about it. So it's not noticing them that you're missing, but uh, tran, uh, transforming them into something that you can put out. I've always looked at myself as like uh, uh, there's a
It's not
technology.
even it's not even necessarily transforming them, because I can write about ideas, but the difficulty is uh, writing about these subjects without just focusing on the pain of these subjects, and multitasking, adding uh, the
Well,
moments
you
of
got to
fun.
train yourself. You got to train yourself because, as I've said once or twice before in these interviews, some famous painter, and I forget which one, it's been attributed to many of them, said that it took me 50 years to learn how to paint a masterpiece in 3 or 4 or 5 hours, whatever it was. You have to train yourself. Learn to mute the emotion and focus on the art. Because again, I've said it. Art is primarily an intellectual exercise. Don't believe these people who say that it's an emotional exercise for us. No one uh, is touched by the art emotionally because primarily because if you don't have the intellectual ability to understand what the words are saying, the emotion isn't going to get there. This isn't a visual medium writing where if I see Max von Sydow in The Virgin Spring, his shoulders slumping from behind as he's playing a knight whose daughter's been raped and killed. There's no words that are needed there. I can get that primarily emotional. Now, we can talk about the technical aspects intellectually of that film, but that's going to hit you first emotionally. With writing, it can't, because writing requires you to have the intellectual ability to make a narrative from what are basically these dark runes on a white medium somehow. These, I mean, this is the closest thing to telepathy. So you have to be able to train yourself to mute that emotional need or whatever it is, and focus first on the writing, first on the intellectual part.
I agree. It is difficult to put into practice, despite that, because I think that we do respond to the emotion first in as people in many regards. I wanted to talk about a little bit of it. You're very good at that aspect, sort of the inner and outer critic, where you're able to. I mean, even your own stuff in true life, it's sort of like you getting outside of yourself and detaching yourself from that emotional moment, and just looking at it objectively. At least that's how it's written. I don't know how it works for you as a person.
Well, let me give you an example. I mentioned Kiwi's last burst of energy when she went to see Oscar on the table when they were both put down. Now, for me, I want I want to know everything from cradle to grave. I knew these kittens, both of them. We got Oscar when he was maybe 4 months, and we got Kiwi when she was maybe about 2 months. And if I had my brothers, Jessica didn't want me to take a photo of them on the table when they were dying. She didn't want to remember them that way. But for me, I want to know it all. I still remember, I think I've mentioned this in some of the things, when my dad died. He had been about 180, 190 pounds most of his life, 5'9". When he died, he was maybe 100 pounds, a skeleton from 2 types of cancer that killed him. Um, but in my mind, I see my dad, I see him as the robust man when I was a tot. I see him as the senile guy going senile when I was in my preteens and teens. I see him as the man dying, and I see him as the corpse that was there. Um, I can look at the photos of him as a young man. I can see him as a robust, handsome guy. I see him as the personality. I see him arguing with my Hicksville Aunt Dottie's husband, uh, as in the play. I see him standing up,
Is
doing things.
is Aunt Dottie Darla?
Yeah, her real
Oh,
name was
okay,
Dottie.
okay. Because I was reading some of your poems and I found Aunt Dottie in there, and
Yeah,
I had forgotten. I had forgotten about some of these poems, but I think you had one where Billy the Kid is involved in it, and Aunt Dottie is sort of vigil through your dad's death. You've got a few poems with Aunt Dottie. I was just curious.
yeah.
Go on.
Well, my point is that, though, for me, I don't shy away from. Both Jessica and I were crying when Oscar and Kiwi were put down. Um, but at the same time, there was a deep sense of relief because Kiwi had been going downhill for a year, Oscar for about 6, 7 months. Oscar actually slid worse, and he was put down at 11:47 a.m. Kiwi 3 minutes later, and but it's one of those things. I think I just this morning I was writing to this guy on this website Quora. They solicited me for some reason to answer stuff. Maybe someone else did about a couple of months ago, and I was saying that I look at my life and my memories, even the bad ones, the bad people I've known, whether they were the killers or pedophiles, whether it's some of these females that I've written about who've used and abused me over the years. They're all my memories, and even the nasty or bad ones, I sort of cherish. I don't like to put them away. I don't like to not look at them, um, because they're mine. Good, bad, or indifferent, they are mine. Oscar, whether he was the young kitten the first night we got him when he ransacked our bathroom, whether it was in his last moments, Kiwi, whether it was this, that, or the other thing, all of that is Kiwi. All of that is Oscar. All of these interviews that we've done are a minor fraction of all that is Dan Schneider. Dan Schneider is the Danny Wagner that watched TV and loved Mary Tyler Moore and Suzanne Plachette on the Bob Newhart show. Dan Schneider is the guy talking to you now. Dan Schneider is the guy, hopefully in another 30 or 40 years, I'll still be here and lucid and in good intellectual shape. Um, Dan Schneider's the kid who worked at a mob front. Dan Schneider's the kid who was in a all Hispanic gang except for himself. Dan Schneider's the one who liked the New York Yankees as a kid and still does, but has grown beyond sports, that it's not that big a thing anymore. All of these things. So you have to look at these things in the totality, and there's so much there to plumb. Um, as I've said many times before, you can't just think about yourself, but there's so much that happens in any given day. I see customers at the store. Some of the truck drivers I talk to as I'm unloading the trucks, and we talk in cliches mostly. Yeah, how's you doing? Oh, drive safely. Yeah, how you doing? You know, it's the same, but there's a rhythm that comes with these things, and even though like the next three, I'm off today from work, but the next 3 days I'll be working probably 10 days each. Up until the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve day, and I got to do all this stuff because the bosses don't. The company I work for is cheap, and I'm 55 and I'm doing stuff that kids, people 10, 20, 25, 30 years younger than me don't do and don't want to do and can't do, and it's frustrating, but I mean, it is what it is, and you have to learn to accept these. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking, you know, I'm sometime early this next year, I'm going to send around some of my plays again. I'm going to send around, maybe see if I can find some European presses maybe that might want some of my novels.